Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the open session of the Culture and Social Standing Policy Committee. Mr. City Clerk, could I please have a roll call?
Certainly, thank you. I'm just going to turn these up. Councillor Campbell.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Carlson.
Present.
Councillor Palladino.
Present.
Councillor Schmidt-Rempel.
Here.
Committee's all present and accounted for. Also present, Councillor Croson, Councillor Middleton Hope, and I see a couple of members of administration online. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people, past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also the home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. First up, we have adoption of the agenda, moved by myself. Be it resolved that the agenda of the regular meeting of the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee on June 15th, 2023 be adopted as presented. Do we have any changes, Mr. City Clerk?
None.
Thank you very much. Seeing no changes, I'll call the vote. All in favor? And Councillor Campbell, you're in favor of that as well?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That carries. Moving on to the consent agenda from Councillor Palladino. Be it resolved that the minutes of the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee held on May 18th, 2023 be approved, and the Chair and City Clerk designate be authorized to sign and the same, and further be it resolved that the status of initiatives for June 15th be received as information. Councillor Palladino. Vote's been called. All in favor? Thank you very much. Up first, we have presentations. 5.1, Rob Mirashiro, Executive Director of LSCO, Ken Kissick, Streets Alive, and Moral Kiani Terry Family Center regarding the Lethbridge Social Helping Organizations Coalition. Mr. Mirashiro.
Ready to go. Thank you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Chair at home with his sick dog, committee members and council members that are here today. Thank you for letting us do a presentation. So I'm going to run through the slides. I know you have them in your deck already. At any time, if you want to ask questions, or you can ask at the end, that's fine. I have with me Ken Kissick and Morel Kiani from the Family Center. Also David Gabbert from the CMHA. We're part of the leadership group for this coalition. So if you just want to, I'll just throw my hand up or something. So this goes back, this group started, if you go back to March of 2020, when province-wide shutdowns were happening and restrictions during COVID, the City of Lethbridge pulled a bunch of organizations together, go ahead, to try to determine how we were all going to serve our population during the time of restrictions. So the city literally pulled together everybody on Zoom, of course, and we decided that we needed to help keep the numbers low, but we also needed to serve the community. And this was really important to our group to have both of those things in mind. Go ahead. So what did we do? We had 150 people representing 50 organizations, and we used Slack, which is an online communications platform, which is something you can share files with and send instant messages, etc. We had not-for-profit charities, not-for-profit businesses, faith-based organizations, community-based funders, city staff, police, public library, Indigenous organizations, all working together and communicating on how we could serve the community. As part of this as well, the Lethbridge Public Interest Research Group, or LPIRG, created a Facebook COVID-19 support page where 3,000 people in our community offered help to each other. This is something that hadn't been done before in Lethbridge, and literally you'd post, hey, I can't get out, I need some meds, can someone pick them up at the pharmacy? I'm running out of diapers, does anyone have spare diapers? And people would step up. People would bring groceries, people would bring pharmaceuticals, baby supplies to each other in the community. There's also, on this page, there was updates and information about the COVID-19 leadership group, as well as other information from any other government initiatives that were going on at the time. For example, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and anything else that was going on in the city. Other things that were created during this time by our group and others were volunteer wellness checks. So we're going to check on vulnerable populations. How are we going to do that, and how is that going to work? We're looked at the delivery of food hampers to older people. We looked at delivery of food to families and kids that were in need of lunch and food. Restaurant suppliers. And so what happened was, when if you remember, when restrictions happened, restaurants were closed. All of a sudden, food supply companies and restaurants had this glut of food that they needed to get rid of. So they donated it all to the food banks. The food banks needed to get rid of it as well. So what they did was, our group arranged the different ways that we could redistribute some of this food to the community through food hamper programs, through getting it out to the families. We use some of it at our Meals on Wheels program as well. Again, the food banks coordinated the food distribution to any social service agencies that required it. And we're talking all the agencies that required food. And our food banks worked together with all the other agencies to make sure that we got food. So we delivered 15 to 25% more meals to the community residents than were happened previous to the pandemic. So the school system, which is really interesting. So this is where we're starting to tie in the larger community itself. The school system worked with family organizations such as Morales and others to provide activity packs and resources for families, as well as meals and grocery deliveries. Several organizations work to help homeless people and low-income populations through food deliveries, setting up clothing and furniture bank. One that was set up by Streets Alive actually continues to this day as a warehouse for personal goods for people that are in need. And because there is also a limited mobility for people, or for people with disabilities, everything that we could do were also done in partnership with the disability community, which is quite substantial in our community. We certainly believe that health income outcomes improved significantly in our community during the pandemic restrictions because all of our organizations work together so closely. So in 2022, we changed our name to the Lethbridge Social Helping Organizations Coalition. And so similar to our operating model during the pandemic or during the restrictions, our leadership group, which were representatives from the 28 different channels or service pods, and I'll talk about that more in a minute, we meet monthly and continue to meet monthly to discuss issues in our respective sectors and talk about ways and means that we can work better together as a community organizations to solve problems in our community. This is the first time in the long time that I've been involved in human service sector in our community, which is a long time. I mean, a long time, that we work together to do this. So Slack, I've already talked about Slack and it's a way that we just can communicate very well if it's used correctly. There's kind of a shot of what it might look like. Part of what we talked about last year was the water drive. So when the hot weather was coming, we'd post things like this, and all the organizations that might have access to water or needed water, we could communicate that way for Streets Alive, for the food banks, for whomever required water during that hot time could access this, or people could contribute to the supply of water that was going out. So to give you an idea of the communication level for us between March of 2020 and March of 2023, we've had 200 or so members. We shared 8,471 messages and shared 826 files. So just imagine if you had to send that amount of emails or text messages out to individually to those people or in groups, it would become unmanageable. This way, we were able to keep doing that, and we continue to do so, communicate on this platform too today. So here are the sectors that are involved in our group. And some of these have been combined and deleted, so I'm not going to read them all to you, but we'll just go through if you don't look at, hopefully you've looked at it all. There's been combined groups like Christmas Hope as a collaboration of the food banks and Salvation Army. Also includes things like mental health and housing and shelter, Indigenous groups, all the different things that you think can affect our citizens in Lethbridge, things that people might need support for. There's some part of our group is supporting and helping that sector. So let me tell you some really cool things. So this was such a successful collaboration that on October 31st, 2020, our group and the City of Lethbridge was recognized by the World Health Organization and the United Nations on World Cities Day. So what that means, sorry, I should explain that more. So World Cities Day is a recognition of work that was done in that year to help to help communities deal with the pandemic and deal with health crisis resulting from the pandemic. We were by far the smallest municipality and community that was honored on World Cities Day. We were honored the same way that Paris and Berlin and London and Rio, places like that were recognized, and so we're pretty happy about how we were recognized in that way. The other thing that we were recognized for in 2022, which relates again back to our coalition, is that Alberta Recreation and Parks, through the Community Choose Well Healthy Community Awards, City of Lethbridge was giving a wellness leadership for the way that social service providers led active living and healthy food access to maximize services to our community. As well, in 2021, the efforts that we put together were actually put in a academic journal, Frontiers in Public Health, and it was entitled "Practical Solutions to Address COVID-19 Related Mental and Physical Challenges Among Low-Income Older Adults." And they mentioned in there how we pulled together and we're providing services for people during COVID. And this is what the quote was. So as they talked about the kind of work that was going on, they said the City of Lethbridge was recognized for this type of work where more than 50 organizations collaborated across sectors to fight food insecurity of low-income older adults during the pandemic, as well as, of course, kids and families. And again, I'm going to reiterate this. This is the first time that social helping organizations in Lethbridge have worked this well together on such a wide scale. We've established a long-term sustainable network for community support that can be used for future city planning and critical response. So the City of Lethbridge now has a better understanding because of the work that our group has done, how community partners and stakeholders and how we can utilize the existing technology to respond quickly in emergencies like pandemics, how we can collaborate effectively and work together to meet the needs of our most vulnerable populations. Before I go to questions, I'm going to tell you exactly why we're here. The City of Lethbridge started this initiative in 2020, but sometime in the last year and a bit, the city has not been engaged in this work at all. And I'm not going to blame the current people that are involved in community and social development because this wasn't their issue. But I am going to say that there was a time in CSD that they didn't believe in the community part of community and social development. There is no way that a group that is as high functioning as ours is, that is providing supports to the number of people that we do, and that we continue to work together, should not have some support from the City of Lethbridge. Now we'll take questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Miyashiro. Up first, I have Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, I almost said Councillor, Mr. Miyashiro, for this. I think, as you know, yourself, Councillor Campbell and myself were part of the team that during COVID response, we were part of the team trying to look at our social and community services organizations and how we could support them, and we relied heavily on this organization and all their information. You sort of, most of my questions were answered on your last why we're here that wasn't in your presentation. And that was going to be my question, is are you getting any current support or connection from the city of Lethbridge?
As far as we know, there's no one that's employed with the city of Lethbridge that's involved in our group. Oh, they're involved in one of Ken's subgroups.
Okay.
Not involved in our leadership group, or to the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been widespread city involvement in any of the other pods as well.
Thank you. And is that a change from, because I believe when we hit COVID and we started actually the three of us and Mr. Sarsfield would meet at LSCO because so we could socially distance there. At that point, there was city involvement. I believe there was
absolutely.
city staff who actually compilated everything and sort of gathered all the
For the first couple of months, there were probably 10 to 12 city staff involved in the larger group sharing information. For over a year after that, there was a staff person from the city that was part of our leadership group as well. It was disseminating information to our group, as well as taking information from our group back to the city.
Okay, and were you the disconnect or the, I guess the sever? I don't want to say severing, but there was participation and active participation at that time. It's now changed. That's what you're saying, and have you been given a reason why? And I'll probably ask that to our administration.
Well, so this was before the current administration's group's time. There was a disconnect, I think, with what the role of CSD was in our community. And I think part of that disconnect involved, like I said, it seemed like engagement in the community didn't seem to be a priority. So we didn't have any dialogue about it. It was just, we were just informed that they weren't coming anymore.
Thank you for that. If I can.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Absolutely, sorry. I guess the other piece of it is the rearrangement of various roles, and I think reduction in some of the roles in that department didn't allow the certain staff member or individual to participate, and so that's another disconnect that happened.
I think the other thing that's missing in this is because this group came together and was able to jointly submit applications, there was over $500,000 or $500,000 that we were able to bring into the city that wasn't available to the city itself, but it was available to the community. And that money was instrumental, but we would have never got it if we didn't cooperate, and we had the support of the city. I think it's, and of course, there's outcomes that have come out of that. Some of the pods don't need to be active right now because we're not in pandemic. Others that have come out of it, for example, the Outreach Finding Solutions Committee, subcommittee is very active because we're involved in encampments. But we've got probably, Dave, 20 different organizations actively involved in trying to come up with solutions. I, for one, am very grateful for the city in their involvement in the beginning. Okay, I would love to see some kind of participation because you're a key player.
And on that note, it's a lot of information that the city can use directly from a group of organizations that have the firsthand information and the trends and the community needs. It was for us. I mean, I was originally in the intervention in the food pod as the ED of Lethbridge Food Bank, but throughout the pandemic transitioned into the parenting pod. And it's important to also look at that there is the prevention and early intervention and intervention piece all together, coming up with solutions and coming up with different ways of supporting the community. So that prevention piece is not being forgotten as well.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, if I can ask through you to our administration to maybe provide a bit of information. I know we've had some changes in the Community Social Development Department. We did lose a lot of funding from the province. They took it away from us and gave it to another organization in town, and I know that's caused some challenges as well. But is there a reason that we're not connected, and is there a way we could become more connected?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if we were willing to have those conversations, we were more than open to that. But what I will add with the changes in manager, director, funding, changes in the encampment strategy work that we're doing, and on top of housing strategy, on top of a sheltering strategy, I would just say that if someone were able to give us a little bit of grace in working through some of that, we are always open to working with community groups and know that there's a role for the city of Lethbridge. But just under the influx of change that we've had right now, it's just a little bit challenging at this time.
Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope.
Thank you, Mr. Miyashiro, for providing us with this. This is great information. I'm absolutely unaware of it. Had never heard of it, had never heard of the group, had never heard of the work that you've been doing. So I certainly do appreciate it, and I look forward to reestablishing connections between the city and your group, because I think the work that you're doing is exceptional and it has a place. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And you know, that's one of the reasons why we're here today. We probably should have done this last fall, maybe the spring before last, but you know, we didn't. So I'm glad we were able to come at this time.
Do we have any other questions from this committee? Councillor Carlson.
Surprise. Thank you, Madam Chair. If I can, to yourself, Mr. Miyashiro, and of the participants, when we sort of wrapped up our COVID, what the heck was it called? Councillor Crowson, do you remember what we called all those? We had 4 different ones. One was on the economy, one was on... Yeah, but anyways, when we wrapped that up, we tried to compile lists of recommendations, learnings going forward. Does your group have any recommendations, learnings, et cetera, that you could provide? You don't need to...
I think we submitted something to that, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure we developed a submission.
And through the transition of the group going from a very pandemic COVID response into something that we have all seen the value of keeping that connection and that system navigation among all of us, we have transition created terms of references and things that are ongoing where it's not meetings, they're action-oriented meetings. They're meetings that really will for the betterment of the community and that collaboration piece and having the families and community as a center and then organizations coming around. So there is definitely work done. The leadership pod had selected a subcommittee to be able to do that, terms of reference and creating and kind of navigating those pod systems, and we are revisiting that again just to update our terms of reference and really being that action oriented.
And thank you for that. I think what we've heard from our administration is they're very open to reconnecting or connecting. They just need a little, I think Ms. Kleisner called it grace at the moment. But something else, I think it was Deputy Mayor was saying that great information, a great organization to keep in touch with. I think there needs to be a connection to either this SPC or all of council so that it's not 3 years but until we see you folks again or hear any issues. So I think we need to sort of strengthen that connection as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Councillor Carlson. And I think just having these two that are working in this department now that don't have a strong background in the work that we do, but are open and they're smart people and I have a lot of respect for those two, that I know that we can probably work something out. I need to remind this SPC, though, that if you have too heavy of a focus on crisis intervention, you're never going to get to the root of the problem. And if you're going to put all your resources to fixing the crisis without putting too many resources into prevention and early intervention, which Morale could talk about at length, and you probably don't have enough time because she would, by the time she was done explaining it, you would give us all your money. But I just want you to keep that in mind, that you're working on some huge issues, and we all realize that, but you need to understand the other side of it is we need to fix things from the other end too, not just from the end everybody sees. Anything else?
Counselor,
Nope, that's great.
Counselor Campbell?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Mr. Miyashiro. I know being on that committee that Mr. Carlson alluded to, that was it was amazing that the number of groups that were involved, and it was just amazing. But my quick question is, if you're getting together, are you still doing everything on Zoom? Because that makes it a lot easier than having to get together in one facility right now. So is that still Zoom, or are you meeting in person?
We are currently on Zoom, however, have discussed on doing a hybrid model as to making sure that we still have that interaction in person, as well as having the ability to have those who can't come in person still participate. We do also have a online document, a live document where organizations that are part of that pod can put in their updates and also take back information to their current pod. So it's a very live model of communication.
So
Councillor-
availability. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, and it depends on the different pods. So for example, the outreach basic needs finding solution pods, we are meeting in person. In fact, we've got a meeting in 50 minutes in the Culver City room. So it just depends on who's leading and the group, whether they want to get together or not. So it's kind of a hybrid thing. But again, we're evolving. The pandemic kind of, you were in the deep end of the pool right away. But now that we're out of that, we've got the opportunity here to kind of restructure it into a more efficient, effective something that can actually be a great tool for the city to use. We have our housing crisis, we have the vulnerable encampment, and those are things that we can work on in harmony and in unity and be a bigger voice. And especially that works when we're starting to talk outside of the city, but when we want to talk to the province or we want to talk to the federal government. It's not one agency now, it's 50 agencies, and that often will raise a little bit, somebody will listen. So, I think there is a place for both, but each group figures out what works for them, and there's also a shift. And when we were in the pandemic, a lot of the leadership end of it was just coordination. Now that we're out of that, some of the pods have become what we call action ordering. So we're not meeting to move information around. We're meeting to actually come up. What did we learn last week? What are we going to do this week? Where are we going to fill in gaps?
But so the meeting is not an overwhelming part of anyone's schedules, which could be kind of added in if had to be. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Crowson.
Thank you, Chair. I realize I'm not a committee member, so this is actually not procedural, but I'm going to ask for grace in doing this. I understand Ms. Kleisinger wanting the grace period because their staff, yes, is overwhelmed with things, but I would suggest an amendment to your motion. Your motion right now is to likely just accept for information, but I would suggest that administration, in conjunction with the Lethbridge Social Housing Organization, be asked to report back in the fourth quarter of this year to this SPC, so that it's on the books and into the agenda, and two, there is some action beyond just accepting for information. And so I make that suggestion to Councillor Carlson because I can't officially make that suggestion.
Actually, I think under our bylaw, you can do anything you want except vote.
Technically, making a motion is similar to
But
voting.
a good suggestion. Yes.
So I'd love to see that as part of the committee's motion.
Our clerk's office is going to get that written up for you.
Madam Chair, while that is being added, the meeting in Q4, I'll ask both the presenters and our administration, is that enough grace? Excellent.
I think it's important to note that CSD is working with the outreach pod, so it's involved at a level that currently is high priority. I think we just need to expand that.
Great. Thank you.
Just taking a few minutes to get that motion prepared.
Just work with, just work. I could just work with. Well, I guess I should correct them. I guess I should correct. Hey, I got us on the agenda.
There we go. Yep. You're okay with that,
Thank you.
Councillor Carlson?
I think I'll just ask if the presenters and our administration understand the intent of this. Excellent. Yep.
Ask a question. This will go to council as a whole, right? Okay.
If I can, Councillor Palladino, it'll go to council as information, but this is a request of the committee, I believe, that the committee says we'll accept this as information and we'll, at committee level, we'd like a report back in Q4.
If I may, Councillor and Madam Chair or Vice Chair, your motion currently is nothing was going forward to council as a whole. You're receiving as committee as information, and then you should say it's a referral back to administration to come back in Q4.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the suggestion from the non-committee member. From both organizations, our administration and the presenters, it seems that this would not just be doable, but appreciated. I think it'll help better the community. So unless there's any further comment or debate, I will call for the vote.
Vote's been called. All in favor? Councillor Campbell, you're in favor as well? He's had his hand up. Okay.
I am indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. Taste it. All right, up next on our agenda is 5.2, Tara Plato, CEO, Lethbridge Public Library, with regards to Lethbridge Public Library Report to the Community 2022. Ms. Plato.
Good afternoon, members of the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee. I'm pleased to be here today with Library Board Chair Craig Brown to present the library's 2022 annual report on behalf of the City of Lethbridge Library Board. Next slide, please. The operations of the library are informed by the board's plan of service, which outlines strategic goals for the library over a 5-year period based on current community needs. The library's mission, vision, and values define the library's purpose, aspirations, and foundational principles on how we are going to get there, and these are developed and approved by the board as well. The 2022 report to the community that you received highlights the activities and accomplishments for the library in the year and focuses on how we are working towards achieving the board's strategic goals. So in this presentation, I've highlighted how our activities over the last year relate back to the measures in our plan of service. Next slide, please. So this just is an overview of our statistics for 2022, where we saw growth in almost all areas from the year prior and also started to give us a glimpse into how people's library using behavior would look post-pandemic. Next slide. So goal 1 focuses on individuals' ability to use the library as a connection, learning, and resource center, as a place to browse, research, learn, play, connect, and socialize. We saw a positive growth in visitors, attendance at programs and events, and those looking to connect with community and community resources through the library in 2022. Next slide. We want to ensure that we are growing the number of people in the community who belong to and use the library spaces, programs, services, and resources. So our second strategic goal focuses on ensuring our value to the community is demonstrated through increased library membership and usage of our resources. We want to ensure that everyone has equitable and affordable access to library services. In 2022, we saw a positive growth in membership numbers, circulation rates, and rates of satisfaction in almost all categories amongst library users, with the exception of library hours. We continue to see opportunities in increasing the accessibility of our facilities and feelings of safety at the downtown branch. Next slide. The library strives to be an inclusive and welcoming space and service. Individuals should feel that they belong at the library, and our goal is to provide programs and services that promote appreciation and understanding of the diverse populations in the community. Through our inclusive services, programs, and collections, we help individuals build empathy, respect, and acceptance for all community members. We measure our success here partly through employee engagement and community satisfaction surveys. Last year, we saw increases in scores in all areas, and again, continue to explore opportunities for improvement. Next slide. We aim to improve access to our physical and virtual spaces through expanded service points and robust virtual spaces. We also aim to ensure existing spaces are best used to meet the changing community needs and to increase a sense of belonging. I do need to point out an error on your slide. The 2021 number for website users should be 563,000. My apologies for that error. We did see an increase in users of our website in 2022 regardless, as in-person services got back to normal, as well as continuing increases in our social media engagement. We are also currently in the process of developing our facilities master plan, which will help us plan how we can expand library service points in the future to meet the growing population. Next slide. Within library spaces, our goal is to provide opportunities for users to experiment, create, and play to expand their imaginations, knowledge, and abilities. And we do this in a variety of ways through creative spaces and programs. We also do this through virtual spaces. In 2022, we were able to double our number of technology loans and increase usage of our public computers and Wi-Fi. We also saw growth in our use of online services, including e-content and databases. Next slide. Our final goal focuses on providing multiple opportunities for the community to increase literacy skills through our programs and services. For all ages, we support growth of multiple literacy skills to meet personal and professional goals and create lifelong learners. Multiple literacies include early learning, reading, writing, numeracy, financial, digital, information, media, physical, civic, and cultural literacy. One of the ways we measure success here is the ability to provide new learning opportunities through utilization of diverse funding sources. Next slide, please. We were happy to go back to in-person programming in 2022, a third of the way through the year, remove barriers for new Canadians wishing to take the Canadian citizenship exam, and introduce new programming, including a variety of new Indigenous-led programs, as well as continue with no-fee memberships. Next slide. We thank you very much for allowing us to present today, and myself and our board chair are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. Reflecting on the data that you've provided for us, does this reflect both branches? And all the information that you've provided there, does it demonstrate what's going on at both? And are you recognizing an uptick in either one or a reduction in either one?
It does include both branches. So we separate out statistics for branches where we can. We can't do it for all stats. So we did include a statistic on, I think, the second or third slide in, that shows usage of the crossings in Bookmobile as well. Again, we can't separate out everything, but we do watch all. So certainly over the last year, we are seeing growth at all branches. Long-term trends, we're still trying to kind of figure out what we compare to pre-pandemic. But we continue to see growth at all the branches. The biggest decline that we have probably seen is we did see a decline in our program visit attendance numbers. But again, weren't back to normal programming last year, so we're still watching that. And I will say that this year, at our downtown branch, we've had more attendance at adult programs than we had all of last year, so we're starting to see that trend up again as well.
Okay, so the growth that you're talking about is comparing today to pre-pandemic levels, or is it to pandemic levels?
So the growth, the numbers that we're providing today are 2021 to 2022. When we start looking at pre-pandemic levels, we've seen some statistics recover almost completely. So our membership numbers and our circulation numbers are very close to where they were pre-pandemic. We have also seen our online numbers, they exceed what they were pre-pandemic. So website usage, e-content, databases, that all exceeds pre-pandemic. Where we have not seen total recovery yet is attendance at programs, which I just addressed, that is trending upwards. And I think reference questions is down as well. So it varies depending on the statistic itself.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Carlson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You gave me a candy right before asking me to speak. That's not fair. Pardon me. Thank you for that. Question I had kind of similar to Deputy Middleton Hope, but it was about the hard numbers. I was a bit, and I didn't go back to your previous reports to see the increases there or the different, but the crossings, about a third as many people in person visiting the crossings, which, I mean, for me, I go to the main branch. It's since 1977, it's what I've known. But we've got two high schools there, so I assumed that was going to be the busier place, but it's about a third the amount of visits. Is that typical, or is that the plan, or what is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so typically library systems in urban cities, and obviously we are turning into a system. We were a single branch system for many, many years, along with the Bookmobile. Branches like the Bookmobile are meant to be kind of satellite branches, neighborhood branches, community branches. It's much smaller, the staffing is less, the resources are fewer, and because it is meant to serve more specifically the West Side neighborhood. So you still see more people coming to the downtown branch because it does have larger resources. There's, that's where our big events are held because it has the space to do it. So central branches are really important to a library system structure, as well as neighborhood branches. They are meant to serve different purposes.
Thank you. I know that when first contemplated co-location of the two high schools and the library, it's a brilliant concept, brilliant idea. Is it working well? Are the two high schools utilizing the library at all, or is there a way they could be better connected?
They utilize the library a huge amount. So during the day at the Crossings Branch, during the school day, on people's lunch breaks and other breaks, they are using the library. And we do run programming and have other resources for them as well. So definitely the students are a big portion of who's using that branch. And again, that was predicted and planned for. But what we're starting to see is the rest of the West Side community utilizing that branch more. So those numbers do continue to climb. We're seeing more families than we did when the branch first opened, more kind of varied demographics using that branch than when the branch first opened 10 years ago.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the report, Ms. Plato. I know a few years back when you implemented free library memberships, there's people saying, are you sure you want to do that? But I guess my question is it everything you wanted it to be and then some, and is there any, tell me how that's gone.
Free library memberships is commonplace across Canada. In fact, most provinces have never charged. Alberta, it's a relatively new development, but almost no urban public libraries in Alberta charge for memberships. And the reason for that is it does create a barrier for people, and so that's why the decision was made to begin with. So in regards to that, yes, we're happy that we've been able to remove that barrier and continue it. I will say that it is a revenue stream. It was a steadily declining revenue stream, but we still it is still not a permanent decision because we don't have replacement revenue. So we're kind of taking it year by year, trying to ensure that we are able to continue it forward if we can. But definitely, we're happy with the result that it has reduced that barrier for people.
And if I can add to that, it's a annual challenge for us to find the resources to cover for it. So certainly every year we take it year by year. It would be nice if we could implement it as a permanent fixture within the library services, but we don't have the resources to allow us to do that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope.
Thank you. Just a sidebar with my colleague. Just a question, and I only use the Crossings branch. I don't use the downtown branch. It's fabulous. So just in case anybody hasn't mentioned it to you, it's a good place to go. That's because I live on the west side. The numbers of people that are coming into the various locations, is that turnstile activity, or is it actual activity within the complex that you are identifying as people coming to one or the other branch?
So the visitation numbers that you see, that is turnstile activity.
So if I wanted to go to the downtown branch and I wanted to access a service instead of taking out a book, or I wanted to use the washroom, that counts as turnstile activity?
That's correct, yes.
Right.
We do keep other statistics, program attendance, that sort of thing, because we realize that turnstile activity is one count and is not necessarily, the same person can come in 20 times a day. So that's why we have multiple metrics that we use to measure growth. Yeah.
So do you have a sense then whether we're getting good value for dollar at the Crossings branch vis-a-vis the downtown branch?
I guess what I would say about that, and again, is that as communities grow, it's important that everybody has, access to library services. So we know that there are people, without transportation that may not be able to get into the downtown. We know people might not go into the downtown regularly for other reasons. So in terms of providing access to the entire community, it's really important that we have an option outside of the downtown for people. I don't have a dollar figure for you, but again, the usage has just grown over the years as the West Side population has grown, and the building and the resources being so much smaller, being a third of the visitation, is pretty significant.
Thank you.
Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question, because we talk about the facilities. We're even going to be talking about the facilities more shortly. Some of the work, and I'm not sure how much that you do, is outside of your building. I'm thinking of one I'm going tonight, the Wise Owl Trivia, which I think is awesome for building connections, lifelong learning, etc. Are there other programs that you do that aren't tied? Because we're going to be talking about facilities next, that aren't tied to a facility, and they're just sort of making those community connections and synergies, et cetera.
Yeah, so we do have a variety of programs that take place outside of library buildings. Of course, Craig just reminded me, the Bookmobile too is one of those things that we do outside of the building. Yeah, we have a variety of programs. They're usually partnered programs. The Wise Owls program that you pointed out is a partnership with a local business. We do partnerships with Family Center and a variety of different community organizations to take programs off-site. So we do track those separately. I can definitely look up those numbers and send them to you. I don't have them off the top of my head, but we do track those programs separately. They're tracked as outreach programs, and so we do quite a lot. So we're reaching thousands of people that way. The challenge with that is that it's always a push-pull around where the resources are going to go. Obviously, we have 2 buildings and a bookmobile that need to be staffed, so the amount that we're able to do that is limited by resources, really, but we try and do that as much as possible.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. In just reviewing the report to the community, Ms. Plato, if a member of the public were looking for the library's financial statements, and particularly, we talked about revenue and everything like that, where would we find those financial statements? Because I didn't see them as part of the report to community, and are those available somewhere?
So those are part of they are part of board packages. So they should be available on our website as part of board meeting minutes. But I will make sure that they are posted there for sure. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions at all? All right, seeing none, we have a motion coming out of this portion of the library's presentation. Motion 5.2, this is from myself. Lethbridge Public Library Report to the Community 2022. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee receive as information the presentation regarding the Lethbridge Public Library Report to the Community 2022. Does anybody have any questions with regards to this at all? All right, seeing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor? And that carries.
To our city clerk, thank you. So this doesn't get forwarded to council? Because traditionally we'd be saying this be forwarded on to council for their...
In the current wording of the motion that was just passed, it would not be forwarded to the consent agenda of the following council meeting.
I guess that's my question. Is it standard traditionally? I thought all these reports, when we did the transportation master plan, it was just for information, but it was still forwarded for information to our colleagues. Is that something we should consider, or they should have been here like John and, our Deputy Mayor and Councillor Crowson?
That is up to the decision of this SPC if they'd like to forward it up to their colleagues at all.
Next up, we have item 5.3. Again, Ms. Plato, CEO, Lethbridge Public Library, with regards to the Lethbridge Public Library Facilities Master Plan update. Ms. Plato.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask Andrew Brown, who is here from Resource Planning Group in Vancouver, to present on our behalf.
Thank you, everyone. This is an interim report on the work that we've been doing over the last year on the future of the library system, including the facilities. We were asked to develop a library facilities updated master plan. We are not presenting a master plan today. We're presenting our progress toward the master plan. It's very important. What we want to do today is establish the credibility of the work that we've done that is laying the foundation for the master plan. Next slide, please. So we want to provide the council with an update on our draft facilities master plan that's coming later in the summer, early in September, I believe. And we want to receive any feedback now on the identified outcomes for the plan prior to its completion at the end of the summer. So we're interested in your comments on the outcomes that we foresee in the plan, and I'm going to go through those in a moment. The purpose of the Facilities Master Plan, it was approved as part of the 22-23 Capital Improvement Program by the Council. And the purpose is to ensure that the library services align with Lethbridge's growth. It's very, very important that Lethbridge is growing. So what's going to happen to the library system? And how do we get ready for it? And in order to ensure that those services align with the growth, the master plan must evaluate the current service provision, which we've been doing in the last year. We must make recommendations to guide future library strategic plans. These are coming up. We must assist with operating and capital investment decisions. Those will be part of the plan that's coming forward, and recommend services based on stakeholder needs. And finally, last but not least, recommend future facilities needs. Okay. So this is just a little chart showing the outline of what the tasks are involved. It's a complex project. I think it's very well conceived. We're taking a lot of time with it. We have a very good group working on things like the facilities assessments, the current facilities assessments, working with the library on current services, working with community groups in terms of getting community feedback. We began early in 2022 with the procurement of the plan. We've gone through a process of starting up, collecting data, understanding needs assessment, engaging many, many stakeholders. I'm going to talk about them in a moment. An extended period of community engagement. We came to the board of the library in May of this year with requesting approval of a draft vision, what we think we saw coming. We'll talk more about that later. And now we've come here to present the draft thinking to you today. We intend to finish up that thinking in a draft document over the next 6 weeks, and at the end of August, early September, submit the final master plan to the library board for approval, and then come to the city at the end of September, early October, with the plan proposal. Okay, a very, very important part of what we've done is how have we talked to people and who have we talked to? We've talked to a lot of people in terms of stakeholder engagement. We've obviously done surveys. We've engaged the library staff at great length. Then we've had focus groups for special groups, the Economic Development Group of Lethbridge, the Youth Collective, early literacy agencies, not-for-profit community agencies, new immigrant groups, and the Indigenous Sharing Network. Then we went to Opportunities Lethbridge and asked them how they saw what we were doing, what role they saw for the library in the future, how did they think we were doing. And then we went to the City of Lethbridge Planning Department and said, are we making any sense? Have we learned everything we need to learn about what the planning department's been trying to do? So we've been trying to involve every facet of the community because they're all stakeholders in a utility that is, in fact, as serious as the water utility. It's the information utility of the city. It's as serious an infrastructure as a running water system to us. We send invitations to 47 organizations within the following groups: City Council, Administration, Arts and Culture, recreational organizational, educational institutions, health and social services, First Nations and Indigenous groups, business and development groups, and other library affiliates. We've been talking to everyone who we think has a role to play in the future of the library service. Yes, please. So we had many, many different scenarios for community engagement. You can just keep going. We did online surveys, community events outreach, we did farmers markets, we did word on the street, we did in-library displays, we did feedback links on the library website, we did community conversation events at the NMAC Center. We talked to everyone we could think of and investigated every opportunity that came along. This is what we heard. Libraries must be safe, accessible, visible, and attractive urban locations and destinations. The library resources must include comprehensive print and digital media. leading-edge technology, multilingual and professional expertise. I want to just make a comment about leading-edge technology because for the last 35 years that we've been doing library and information systems planning, we've watched the libraries go through an absolute metamorphosis. They need to be completely on top of their game in terms of information technology, and it's moving all the time. And this is generating a completely different kind of librarian than we saw 35 years ago. We need radically innovative professional librarians in the future. And they're coming at us all the time. In terms of facilities, we need multifunctional spaces for individuals and for groups, for meetings, performances, and for projects. We're finding out that the public, now that they're informed by information sciences, they want to do something with the information they get hold of. They want to make things. I was in the Metro Toronto Reference Library and was astonished to find a long table with 24 5-year-olds learning how to solder. That was part of the library's hands-on learning program. And that's the kind of thing. We're seeing all kinds of vocational, artistic, creative laboratories appearing in libraries, in the new libraries. You can see them in Calgary, in Edmonton, in Airdrie that's coming, in Saskatoon that we've been working on, and in Ottawa, which is now up to the 2nd floor. It'll be open in a year and a half. The library program should support all ages, all ethnicities. That can't be underestimated. The ethnic profile of Canada is changing. The ethnic profile of the community is deepening, maturing, widening. The programs must address the ethnic richness of Canadian society and also the socioeconomic groups, because we're seeing very distinct socioeconomic groups with very distinct needs, and the library programs have to address those. The public told us that the library must pursue its ambitious agenda of collaborative activities with social services, cultural, recreational, and educational partners, and build community identity and cohesion. The library is really in the business of community development and has been always. Yes, please. So these are the apparent desired master plan outcomes based on our intensive involvement with the community. What the public told us is the library facilities should contribute to the animation of the city. The animation of the city. You can't just put them anywhere. They are building blocks of the city, and they will attract other activities around them. And the numbers of people involved in libraries are not to be trifled with. We're looking at between 500,000 and 1 million visitors a year to these facilities. This is a lot of activity. This is where the life of the community is. So the library has to contribute to the animation of the city. They're a critical building block. The library is probably the single greatest tool that the member of the public has for personal strategic empowerment. Tools and resources for residents to advance personal and professional knowledge. It's all there in the library, all of it. Many different kinds of literacy, not the least of which is the ever-changing technological literacy, which people turn to the library for assistance with. Community development, you help build community cohesion. The library is doing that every day, building community cohesion, building the understanding between community members, between community groups, collaborating synergistically with other key organizations in the community, partnering with major community sectors to provide meaningful programs and experiences. There's all kinds of things that are done with community agencies, from learning how to do your taxes, to learning how to vote, to learning how to be a Canadian citizen, to learning how to be a student, to learning how to read in your neighbor's language, to learning how to read in an indigenous language. This is all synergistic collaboration. This is community development. And finally, last but not least, the public said the library should have a recognizable presence in the community. So this really starts to say, where are they going to be? What are they going to look like? And the library is seen by everyone as a desired and desirable destination. And speaking personally, I mean, we've had tremendous success with this since I started in 1990 with the Vancouver Central Library. We've done Edmonton, we've done Calgary Central, we've got Airdrie on the go, we've got Saskatoon in design, we've got the new Ottawa Central Library being built, we've done Winnipeg, we've done Salt Lake City, New York Central, on 42nd and 5th Avenue, and we've done Seattle. So we know what libraries can do for cities, and it's time to think ahead. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do it very, very carefully, without flamboyance. We're trying to do it on a rational basis, understanding what are these building blocks for the community. Thank you. I think that's just, okay, the tools we are using to reach our conclusions. We've been using the City of Lethbridge planning studies for vision and development. We've been using, this is absolutely critical, the population projection for the City of Lethbridge. And it's half as big again for 2036, right? And what does that mean? What does that mean? We've been using all the input from stakeholders and the Lethbridge community. We've been using all the library's public key performance indicators. We've been using all our experience working with other library systems, the benchmarking of peer systems, and all the library industry standards, including Alberta's best practices for public libraries. So we're not just dreaming about something nice. We're thinking, what is this building block for this critical civic infrastructure, and what's the justification for it? Yes, please. So I just want to close, because this is an interim presentation. We're going to come back in a couple of months with, well, this is what we think it might look like. What is the one thing that you would like us to consider while moving further forward with this facilities master plan?
Do we have any questions at all from members of the committee? Councillor Carlson.
You're not really, well, one quick question. Lethbridge Youth Collective, what is that? I'm familiar with Youth Advisory Council that we have, that we talk to quite a bit. The only youth collective I know of is the Youth Workers Collective. And so I'm just wondering, who's the Youth Collective?
So it is basically a group of service providers in Lethbridge that serve youth.
Okay, so it is that same, the Youth Workers Collective. Okay, thank you for that. One thing, you've asked for what we think you should consider, and the desired outcomes I think are great. Is animation the new word for vibrancy? Is that, when I saw...
We'll take it.
Okay. Usually I see vibrancy of the city. I saw animation, and I was wondering if that's something I should be able to...
It's good, yeah.
Okay, thank you
Nice. Thank you
for that. Something I think I'd like to see considered, and you sort of have it in the bookmobile, but you talk about animating, so you have to be very... well, you have to be thoughtful of where you're placing facilities. Is there any, I'd like to see more thought in, they're not really pop-ups, but they could come and go, ebb and flow as the community changes, whether they're modular structures or they're facilities, et cetera, that could be put in somewhere. I'm thinking off the top of my head, things like Nordbridge on the north side could host a small library. The new agri-food hub could have that sector of the city covered. Those types of things that could ebb and flow as the needs in different areas. Is that something that is useful or thought of, or is it impossible?
Well, I can let a little cat out of the bag, that part of what's coming in terms of the suggestions for physical facilities will involve permanent facilities and mobile facilities, and maybe even storefront facilities. but different approaches to what kind of presence does a library have in a community, depending on the locale, the surrounding population, the hours of operation, the practicality of the functions that you want to have in a certain location. So we are looking into all the things you suggest. They will be coming forward.
Thank you for that. And when we talk about the synergies with different groups, organizations, I'm not sure they're doing it right now. I haven't seen anything, but Tourism Lethbridge used to have Food Truck Fridays where they'd fill their parking lot with a bunch of food trucks. I've always thought, wouldn't it be awesome to have the bookmobile parked right there as well, so you can go grab a taco and a book at the same time. Is that the kind of synergies you're looking to create?
Yes, that is a situational and episodic synergy. There's also the question of the more permanent synergies, like in a civic center, which I don't know if you want to think about that or not. But what other organizations are planning to be located centrally, and what synergy would arise from locating a library near them? So there's a temporary synergy, like a pop-up, which is terrific, and then there's the locating the library with other adjacent facilities. They all work together.
Madam Chair.
Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I was seeing the master plan suggestions and what we heard, it sort of made me think, well, that's sort of just a kind of an affirmation of what I think the library has always wanted to be. Is that fair to say that what you're seeing from suggestions has always been the vision of the library? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's out of line with kind of what our goals already are. But yeah, there was definitely, talking to the community, emphasis put on different things. We, are experts in libraries, and we know library systems around the country and how libraries grow and thrive. And so we certainly had some ideas going in. But I would say lots of those, I guess, were confirmed, but we also heard some things we hadn't thought of. So it's certainly not, again, out of whack with what we're currently doing. It does seem to jive, yes.
And I do like the idea of animation for the city. I vote for Simpsons. Sorry, that's a poor joke, and I apologize. I don't know that. No, I think I like where it's going with that, and nicely done. Thank you,
Councillor Crowson.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions. First, just to kind of give us a sense of where you're heading. So you're trying to get yourself in queue for the next capital budget, I'm assuming. You want to get this done, and then your next thing will be to look at creating projects that might be coming forward to the next capital budget in 3 years or whatever.
Essentially, again, we don't have timelines or recommendations outlined yet. This is meant to be long-term, like 25 years, because you really do have to plan that far out, as you probably know, for big capital projects. So if we're looking at, for example, the downtown branch and what that might look like in the future, you have to start planning far out. So every kind of bigger urban library has a facilities master plan. We didn't have one previously, so the idea is just to ensure that we are planning so that when opportunities arise, we know what our strategy is in terms of being able to serve the growing population. Because as the population grows, so do all municipal services, obviously. So it is long term. And not necessarily targeted at a specific capital plan, but we'll see, what the recommendations and timelines that come out of it are.
And since they only come up every 4 years, you got to try to hit them when you can hit them. You were talking about synergy, et cetera. One of the things we hear all the time is space is required for not-for-profit groups in this community, usually groups that have no money, but need space for storage. You guys offer a lot of programming space, but are you talking to any groups about storage space, meeting space, office space? Is that a conversation that you're hearing? Is that a conversation you're hoping to have with the community?
Certainly in some of our conversations with focus groups and those sorts of things came up. So again, as Andrew said, it's really about looking for what are the possible partnerships and synergies. And again, I think, you know, you see especially central libraries, but neighborhood libraries too, there's lots of co-location opportunities. The library really, you know, does often serve as a community hub. So the more kind of services and organizations you can have in the same vicinity, the better. We've also seen some really creative partnerships with libraries coming up. I was recently at a meeting where a speaker from Helsinki was there, and they're really looking at the synergies between libraries and parks, for example. We've seen libraries, Vancouver, I think, has libraries with residential. We see storefront libraries in malls. Ontario has lots of those. So again, there's lots of different possibilities, and so the idea of having these conversations was to explore what those different possibilities might look like. So all of those, yes, I would say are possibilities. Yeah.
That is certainly being discussed at municipal level, that no public building should be built without residential included. Your fire hall should have residential, everything should. And it's one of the big conversations happening because it's one of the greatest needs we have in communities is residential. Anyone who lives in Lethbridge understands that there is a feeling, real or perceived, depending on your perspective, of geographical imbalance in Lethbridge. Some people get everything in Lethbridge and some people get nothing, is the feeling in Lethbridge. How are you considering that in this plan?
I don't want to let all the cats out of the bag, but we have analyzed the community demographics, and what I guess could be called the community attitudes or the community culture in a very general term. And we realize there are wounds that need to be healed.
Good luck with that.
And that can be healed with these projects if they're handled sensitively. And we know that there's a north side and a south side, and they have needs in the future, and with the master plan needs to address them. And we will come forward with proposals for both those areas. But we think it could go deeper as well, and I'm fascinated by what you say about the housing issue, because if you go back to that magical word, vibrancy or animation, the best way to animate anywhere is exactly what Jane Jacobs said. You do it by having people living there. You put housing near these magnets of community activity, and it makes it all the richer and all the safer and all the more attractive. And actually, it makes it all the more practical in terms of how our cities are going to have to be run in the future, given what it costs to spread out. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in this project in terms of being able to bring in new planning thinking because of what the library can provide to other activities such as residential activity, partner services. I know there would be so many commercial outlets and nonprofit outlets that would welcome physical accommodation in library buildings.
Since they won't let me live in the library, I just built one in my house. Way easier just to have it all by myself.
How big is your house?
Well,
Can we add a branch there?
the books aren't all in just one house, but there's about 10,000.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from members of the committee? All right, seeing none, I have a motion here from Councillor Palladino with regards to Lethbridge Public Library Facilities Master Plan update. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee receive as information the presentation regarding the Lethbridge Public Library Facilities Master Plan update. Councillor Palladino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If there are no further questions, I'd like to thank Mr. Brown and Ms. Plato for their update on the master plan, and I will call the question.
Question's been called. All in favor? That passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
All right, moving on to item 5.4, Travis Grindle, Recreation Services Manager, with regards to indoor court audit and analysis recommendation strategy.
I didn't. No, I don't have very many friends. Maybe. Good, good. Everybody's good. All right. Good afternoon, members of the Cultural and Social SPC. Thank you for your opportunity to present here today. Quick look at the agenda. Here's an overview of what I'll be presenting today. A quick background of how we got here, a review of the actions we have incorporated or plan to incorporate in response to the recommendations, a summary statement of sorts, a review of possible council considerations, and finally answer any questions you may have. So how we got here. As part of the CIP process in 2022, Rec and Culture received direction to do an audit and analysis of existing indoor multipurpose and court spaces. That was completed last fall, and in December, Council asked administration to review the recommendations and summarize next steps or directions that can be implemented accordingly. Next slide. And again. Recommendation 1 was in regard to new school sites and the importance of working with the school districts to secure community access to these functional spaces. As administration, we continue to meet and communicate with the school districts frequently to address any access challenges and concerns. As well, Rec and Culture has made it a priority to do better in tracking and reporting out on usage data in these spaces and all Rec and Culture spaces going forward. For council consideration is to continue to fund the upsizing of these school gyms in the future. Next slide. Recommendation 2 is to collaborate with other community partners on the exploration and development of large span spaces needed in our community. Rec and Culture continues to meet with various community stakeholders frequently to stay current with future developments, current trends, and needs. Next slide. Recommendation 3 is to initiate a feasibility analysis that would look at possible site locations, associated costs, and operating models. Originally, we were coming to council to ask for funding approval to do this study today, but in light of council's approval to look at a building assessment of the exhibition pavilions, we would recommend waiting for the results of that report before pursuing this study. Next slide, please. Recommendation 4 was for administration to review the joint use agreement with the school districts to identify possible process efficiencies within the agreement framework to increase community access. Through this work, we have already updated the permissible activities list, updated our application processes, and updated our communication processes to both the school districts and the user groups. For council, directing administration to work with the school districts in revisiting the joint use agreement to discuss alternative processes and incentives to increase community access may be a consideration for the future. Recommendation 5 is for administration to refresh our allocation practices, and we've begun that work and are hoping to implement that for the fall of 2023. Recommendation 6 is for Rec and Culture to increase and enhance their data collection and tracking processes. And as mentioned earlier, we've begun that work to better collect usage data for all our facilities. And with this information, we will better be positioned to identify the pressures and challenges of our community users. Next slide. The last recommendation further suggested that we seek efficiency. Gym time we currently have. Am I pushing? There we go. That's the problem. Thank you. Sorry. Through our conversations with our joint use partners, we have made the following changes. Allow for more than one booking in the same space in an evening where possible. Allow for one-time access of available spaces to accommodate canceled time where possible. And lastly, we will look to allocate spaces based on the activity type and need. Next slide. So in summary, we've made a number of small improvements to how we operate within the joint use agreement. We are hoping to see an increase in available community access of approximately 3 to 5 hours per week during our booking season. This should equate to roughly 120 to 180 hours of extra gym access, or approximately 60 to 90 additional bookings annually. Last slide. For council today, we are no longer seeking funding approval for a feasibility study at this time, as we will wait to see the results of the building assessment at the exhibition before proceeding. For future consideration, our recommendations numbers 1 and 4 which include continued upsizing of future school gyms and possible corporate review of the joint use agreement down the road. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time, and I'll answer any questions.
Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope.
So, Mr. Grindle, you walked into this one.
Uh-oh.
How does retaining and repurposing the pavilions impact your strategy?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the biggest
Thinking about it, I know it.
It certainly would make a huge difference. I think it is something that we would love to dream about, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself and start to make it happen. The large spaces there could accommodate a number of the challenges that various groups are seeing depending on what the assessment says. So for instance, something such as the North Pavilion could house large space activities like soccer, baseball training, small field football, that type of work. Something like the South Pavilion, you could easily accommodate, it has accommodated in the past, basketball, volleyball, pickleball, those types of things.
So are you in communication with a number of groups in regards to potentially their hopes, aspirations, and expectations?
Continuously, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Crowson.
Thank you, Chair. So we've made these changes which will allow more use of these. How are you communicating, following up on what you just said and what you said to Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope? How are you going to communicate this to the public? Because you're probably talking to groups that are already there. What about the groups that don't even know this is an option? So what's your communication plan?
In all honesty, Councillor, there isn't one because the backlog and demand is already there. So it's more of a matter of accommodating the requests we already have.
So this will work effectively for the groups that exist, the groups that are already using this. It may not cover enough space for new and upcoming groups is what you're being quite honest about.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. The other thing is, so you're recommending, and it's council's decision, continued upsizing of gyms is a recommendation. And it's one of those things, I mean, we spend $400,000 or so on each gym. So if we were to go to the community based on what you have seen and what you have brought forward, this is a good expense for the city to go forward on just from a recreation background, not from overall the city, but from your perspective, it's a good expense of city money.
For sure. Given the lifespan of those structures, we for sure see our investment out of that. I think we need to do a better job moving forward in securing what that investment means. So in the past, prior to, let's say, the last 3 or 4 upsizes, there wasn't any tie or official agreement that would dedicate access or commit access over and above what is already in place in the joint use agreement.
And just dreaming here, so if you don't have an answer, I understand. But I mean, one of the things is we know there's a wait list. If we upsize gyms and had city-operated facilities that could take more of it, is that the perfect world if we were dreaming? Because we don't have the funding for it, but is that the perfect world? So if we had the exhibition and the upsized gyms, go for both and we'd meet the need?
For sure, and I think to the community groups that probably would like to have indoor access and haven't even really considered expanding into that area. And I mean, there's lots of those, roller derby has to access summertime space. They get limited wintertime space. Pickleball is a sport that has obviously grown immensely and is always seeking more space. Our current rules don't allow for floor hockey to be in any of the joint use gyms, and so they're always seeking more space. So there's lots of groups, I think, that haven't come to my office seeking more gym time that are still looking for it.
So again, just from a needs perspective in your department, it's not either the exhibition or upside gyms. It's in the perfect world, you'd want both.
For sure, yeah,
Okay.
for growth in particular.
Perfect, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Grindle, for this. On the recommendations, I see number 3, you've changed that in light of Council's recent decisions.
Yes,
So that's
yep.
excellent, thank you. That was one of my notes. Recommendation 4, It talks about directing admin to work with the school districts in revisiting. Do you need our direction to do that? Because I've been wanting to do that for some time now, and if you want our direction, I will add.
So I think this is it's certainly a larger conversation over and above my office. The joint use agreement affects way more than just the operation and access to gymnasiums, which I'm here today. But I mean, my office also works with the school districts on sports fields as well. And then you look at the land reserves and Opportunity Lethbridge and their role, as well as parks in maintaining those playgrounds and those spaces. So it's a lot larger conversation than what I can bring forward. And I mean, I would suggest it's something that Carly should probably speak to more than me.
Thank you, and I was going to ask Ms. Kleisinger and her group if that is direction. Yeah, if that is direction that would be helpful from council. I have felt there are challenges with the joint use agreement thus far, and I would love to see that renegotiated or rediscussed.
What I would say is when council provides very clear direction through resolution, that it is a lot easier for administration to know where we stand and where to follow up and when to come back.
All right, here's second question, if I can, Madam Chair, through you to now Ms. Kleisinger, who's had the ball thrown to her. If that came forward as a recommendation of committee and went to council, and it would be direct administration to work with school districts in revisiting joint use agreement to discuss alternative processes and incentives to increase community access, not just in gyms, but in the whole portfolio, is that something that could be carried out with your current staff and budget, or is that something council would have to add money to?
I think the thing that we would have to consider is what the capacity is of the other departments as well. I know presently development is working towards land reserve joint use agreements. The province, as part of the MGA, has asked for those to be in place. So there's a lot of things at play here that, again, are more and higher above than just sport and rec.
Agreed. So just to close this out, because I'm musing about it right now, is it something that would come back at a future time, or do you want direction today to council for their next deliberations?
I think if you were able to provide a fairly wide date range, then I could make it happen with all the parties, as long as we're not looking at something in the too near future.
Okay, thank you.
If I could add though, the joint use agreement as it's currently laid out, it functions very, very well. We don't have any challenges with the agreement. Every aspect that the agreement calls for is being fulfilled in terms of what the schools should be providing to the community and our access of that. It's just how do we go beyond what is laid out there?
Councillor Carlson, should this be at this committee, or should this be talking to our two members who are already on the joint school board committee? Because again, right, should it start first at the council level before it goes to admin, or should it go directly to admin? Is just something we might want to consider in how you form your motion.
My thought would be that we would possibly at this committee recommend that council, so it would go to a council meeting. It could be discussed at that council meeting, and if the joint use reps or school board reps had some questions, they could address them at that time. It's something that I have felt has needed. When was the last time we did the joint use agreements? Like 70?
Well, the operational piece that I can speak to is 2013.
2013. So it's been some time,
yes.
And I'm not sure that it's working well for us, or as well as it could be.
No, I completely understand
so
that.
my thought was to put it to council. If there was concerns at council, they could kibosh it there, or say there's a better path. I'm not sure what you
Well, I think Councillor Schmidt-Rempel and Councillor Parker are both on that. They are both here. So if they would like to at this time weigh in, going, do they think it's better for us to send it to them and then to admin once they've had that conversation at the governance level? Or just to admit, like, right? I just don't want to step on any toes if there is a more constructive way of achieving what we all want to achieve.
Just to weigh in on this, and I'll let Councillor Parker weigh in, but I actually like the approach that Councillor Carlson is suggesting. We don't have another meeting of that joint group until the fall, so this can give our administration a little bit of time to look at it, prepare for it, and then it's something that Councillor Parker and I can ensure is added to the agenda at our next meeting.
Okay, so do it at a two-prong level.
Yeah, and then, and I think, Councillor Parker, did you want to add anything to that, or do you think of this a different way?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd agree with you. And anyway, if it does go to committee, you know what committee does? They're going to send it to administration. So it doesn't really make sense. So I would agree with you as well, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. All right, so the administrative team is working through that motion. I see Councillor Crowson, though, you had a question?
No, because I wasn't sure what that committee was doing. That was what I was going to bring up, is that, we could have it at that committee level, but if it would just be referred to administration anyways, might as well go right to administration. It does make me hope that that committee, though, working with the school board, will also have that conversation.
And Councillor Parker and I will be able to take that. And if we do have it coming as a direction from council, that's something that Councillor Parker and I can use in parts of that conversation as well.
And thank you, Madam Chair and Councillor Crowson. And I was thinking in discussion with the city clerk, is that we're not looking for this before the end of 2024. It's not something to get done today, but probably before our next CIP or next council's CIP, it'd be good to have all this information. So I'm putting it a year and a half out there to at least report back, if that makes sense. I enjoy tomorrow as well.
That motion's coming up. Do we have any other questions from members of this committee? All right. See.
On the operational side of gymnasium access, it is working.
So is it revisiting, or is it revisiting and enhancing, or
And sorry, is it just the operational piece you're looking at, or is it as well the parks caretaking of sports fields and those spaces and playgrounds?
In my mind, it was many things because we have joint use agreements. So our community gets access to the school gymnasiums. Through that, the schools get access to city facilities.
Correct.
All kinds of pressures put on either party. I think it could be better utilized. I know that the school boards have built their own facilities that currently may not exist in the joint use. Right. We have one beautiful theater across the river that I don't think is part of our joint use agreement. Maybe it is, but I don't think any community group ever gets access to that, but the community school groups get access to our community theater. So I think there may have been a disconnect.
Correct.
It seems we do something, we allow them to come and play. I don't know that we're afforded the same access. So I think there's some inequity there. And that's what...
Revisiting just means, to me, just kind of clarifying things. I think you want to enhance, grow, fix.
Fix. I mean, revisit for me puts everything on the table. So I think I get what you're saying, but it is sort of let's sit and talk about how to make this equitable and better access for all in our community.
I don't know.
Because you were asking, is it just operational? Can it be done just, what we're talking about, can it be done at your level, or is there a role that we must have involved with?
Given the complexity of the agreement and the number of departments and layers that it touches, I would venture to say it should be higher than operational. Particularly if you're going to loop in gym size upsizing in the future as a CIP component.
Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope? Yeah, so whose motion is this? It's Councillor Carlson's.
Friendly amendment to my colleague would be, instead of revisiting, would be to update.
Okay. Is it still administration, or is it the city of Lethbridge? Which would be?
I do like update.
Yeah.
I guess my question now is that I'm sort of throwing this over the wall at all of us here. I wonder if item 3 may be referred back to this committee for discussion, which would give our administration and folks some time to sort of understand what they'd be grappling with. We could refer it to administration to provide a further discussion and direction in September when we'll be meeting again. Would that make sense to folks? That way I'm not throwing this.
Give them to October, because we do allow them vacations and stuff.
No. Yeah, I would pull number 3 out, and that would be a referral to basically administration to be prepared. You kind of know where Councillor Carlson is wanting to go and some of the thoughts. So yeah, I'd be prepared to remove number 3 for now and refer it to admin to come back to committee in October.
And I think that would work out well too, because that gives, this will act as preparation for Councillor Parker and I and our administration at our next school board meeting, right? When we're bringing this forward, we will have that prep work done and give us a foundation to speak from.
Just a leftover cup upstairs.
Madam Chair, do we meet in September as our next meeting? Is it September or October? I think it's September, isn't it?
It is, but if we we don't have to meet on this right in September. We can put this off to our later meeting.
Yeah, I would just double check in the time.
Yeah.
The dates.
Yeah, no, we can bring this forward to one of those meetings, Councillor Parker, once we have the information. And we're prepared to speak to it. All right, so we have a motion, be it from Councillor Carlson, be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee recommends that Council, 1, receive the summary of actions and steps that have been initiated regarding the recommendations identified in the 2022 indoor court and audit analysis as provided in attachment 2, presentation, and 2, as identified in recommendation number 3 of attachment 1, receive the recommendation as information for future consideration pending the outcome of the feasibility study for the former exhibition pavilions. Further be it resolved that Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee refer recommendation number 4, direct administration to work with the school districts updating the joint use agreements and discuss alternative processes and incentives to increase community access, and report back to return to the October 2023 meeting of the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you. Just before open debate, just a question through you, Mr. Grindle or Ms. Gleisner. Is that what you need from council, and does especially that further be it resolved make, is that enough clarity on what we're asking for? Uh-oh.
Through the chair to Councillor Carlson, just so I'm clear on that last further be it resolved, are you looking for administration to take a more broad look at the joint use and determine what the scope and range of revisiting is going to look like, and then come back and provide that information to yourselves?
Thank you, Mr. Harper. I think that's exactly what we were looking for, is kick it to administration to sort of look at the joint use agreement and come back in October and say,
this is what we need to look at.
Yeah, and here's how we could look at that, whether it's operational or governance or in toto.
I think the concern is work with the school districts. I think
Correct.
it's more talk to them, like at an operational level, but don't make any decisions, because that would be up to us.
Okay.
But I think that's more what you mean, right? Because work with the school districts and is very like authoritative. I think it's more talk to your colleagues, come up with ideas.
That was my concern as well. It's very prescriptive that we are going to be working with the school districts.
I'm wondering, the problem is, the recommendation number 4, what's in quotes there is what the recommendation was. We could just remove the stuff in quotes and just say, refer recommendation number 4 to administration to determine the scope.
That's much more clear than, that's what I was thinking is what
Perfect.
you wanted.
Thank you. Yeah, we just put what the actual recommendation was, but yeah, we'll just refer recommendation 4 to administration to come back to us.
Perfect. That's
excellent. Thank you.
All right, Councillor Carlson, this is good. Vote's been called. All in favor? Councillor Campbell, you are in favor? Yep, okay, there we go. All right, thank you very much. Item 5.5, Andrew Malcolm, General Manager, Community Social Development, regarding update shelter development strategy. Mr. Malcolm. No, and speaking with administration, they would like this presentation to come first.
Thank you very much, Chair and members of Cultural and Social SPC. So today I'm here joined by Mr. Logan Bartholow, and we're here to present an update on the direction of the OBR on January 24th, 2023, which was regarding the strategic long-term response to sheltering residents in need and those difficult to house in Lethbridge. Next slide, please. So there's 2 main goals of the strategy. The first is to clarify the city's involvement in shelter development and identify opportunities to ensure that there's land available and that there's land adequately zoned for shelter use defined in our land use bylaw. The second goal is to ensure that the city of Lethbridge has adequate shelter capacity to house all those experiencing homelessness in the community on any given night. So I just wanted to take a moment to expand a little bit on the second one, in terms of the importance of this strategy as administration sees it. So we, like City Council, business owners, landowners, residents, and community members, see the impacts and the frustrations of growing homelessness, mental health, and addictions in Lethbridge. And this includes the impacts and frustrations of those that are deeply embedded and in battling with those complex situations. We further acknowledge that when we roll out strategies like the Downtown Clean and Safe strategy from 2019 and the encampment strategy, which was most recently approved a month ago, that these issues typically change and evolve. They don't typically go away. And so this leads to frustration. So it's important to remind ourselves that these strategies are not strategies for everything. They have a specific goal and an outcome in mind, and we're looking to build more around those to better lay out a path forward for the community. To make an impact, we must bring many different initiatives forward, and what we do is we look to align those with already approved overarching plans like our municipal development plan, our community well-being and safety strategy, and our municipal housing strategy, which provide the umbrella or framework or direction for where we're bringing these up from. However, the real solutions hopefully lie in these more operational-based strategies. And so we are working with this along with other initiatives that are coming down in alignment with the Housing Accelerator Fund to help us build, or at least get us closer to building, that social infrastructure which our community desperately needs. We recognize that sometimes with social infrastructure or infrastructure in general, we're talking about things that might not come to fruition for 10 to 20 years, but much like building a bridge or a road or a sportsplex, you need to start the planning well in advance. So without the diversity and opportunity for safe and secure shelter, we will continue to spend a lot of time, effort, and resources moving issues around, which is why we again feel this is very important. Next slide, please. So an important piece of this plan is to pull together the different directives that have come forward over the last 14 months in particular, and there's 6 here, 3 of which are provided additional direction for administration. Ultimately, what we'd like to do is have this new directive as our one directive moving forward, so that we do not have to look at areas of gray or potentially have multiple points of reporting back to council and the community. Next slide, please. So the 3 that we're really focused on and why we think this is an opportunity for consistency relate to the council directive to administration to develop a strategic long-term shelter strategy, to consider other sites for an interim sober shelter, and the approval of $100,000 for the exploration of a community care campus. Next slide, please. So the rationale is that the city has historically taken a hands-off approach when it comes to new shelter development, leaving the responsibility with the province and with nonprofit, typically nonprofit, shelter operators. The province has provided input that the city currently lacks suitable shelter locations with appropriate zoning, which is impeding shelter development and supply and capacity increases. We would love to give you money, but there's nowhere to put it or to develop it, is essentially the line. I'd love to give you money, that's maybe an over-exaggeration, but the city can improve the potential for new shelter development and additional capacity by increasing the supply of land that can be used for a shelter, and that can be done in multiple different ways. Next slide. Just a reminder that we did complete a point-in-time homelessness count in 2022, and of that, 235 were deemed to be unsheltered. Since 2018, the number of people experiencing homelessness has doubled, and the number of those unsheltered has nearly increased by 35 times, and this is where we draw the direct parallel to the visibility of it in our community, particularly in encampments. Next slide, please. So when we look at existing shelter capacity in our community, the current Lethbridge Shelter and Stabilization Center, operated by Blood Tribe Department of Health, approximately has 125 beds, which represents 80% of the beds in our community. We also have a small youth shelter that Woods Homes operates with 8 beds, and the YWCA's Harbor House, which operates with 24 beds. Those are the number of beds that they are funded for, and they ebb and flow based on demand, and then they really truly do their best to do their best with the capacity up until limitations with staff and funding. Next slide, please. So as we look at the typical shelter development restrictions, we know that there's a lack of available and appropriately zoned land to either purchase, lease, develop, or redevelop. As of right now, there really is only one site in our community that has shelter as a permitted use, and even with that, it has its own set of complicated development regulations, which the city will be bringing forward in the near future for rezoning. The lack of capital and operational funding for shelter development operations, as well as a lack of available and willing shelter developers and operators, and we do see it being a little bit that 3 is related to 1, in that we have organizations that have considered or have brought forward to do a shelter in our community, and through the process of trying to find land, have been effectively run down through the process. Next slide, please. So how municipalities can facilitate shelter development, we've put 5 here, the 3 of which that are in the blue are where we suggest our recommendation is to focus on, but the other 2 are areas that a municipality can get involved to if they so wish. So reducing land use restrictions, land banking and asset rationalization, which is just basically using better use of existing facilities, capital funding, operational funding, and service operations. Next slide, please. So our administration's recommendation is 4-part really. We can make shelter a permitted use in more areas of the city. We can actively land bank for social uses, so secure land of city-owned land that we can utilize to help facilitate the process. We can provide capital funding, potentially using currently approved housing funds, and we can continue lobbying other levels of government. We've included a little bit of a chart here, or a spectrum, that shows where we believe we currently are, where there is few to no sites available for shelters of permitted use, and we're really not active in that process outside of some advocacy efforts. We do think that we can move significantly to the right, which would put us in a better position as a city, but yet maybe not all the way to the right, understanding that there are still, some belief that there are other levels of government that should be in that space primarily. Next slide, please. So we've put forward some recommendations. I won't read them off the slide. Essentially, to return to council as we work through this with regular updates, that we work with the government of Alberta and current and potential shelter operators to identify funding sources for both temporary and permanent solutions. Next slide. That we address the existing resolution directing for the expense of $100,000 for a community care campus with very specific laid out objectives with 1, 2, 3, and that money be made available to advance this strategy. And then the third piece there, that we have a long list of additional recommendations that we'd be happy to discuss with SPC in camera, and those are in camera largely because they deal with land and legal matters. With that, I am happy to answer any questions that are based on the public part, and then we can potentially go in camera.
Councillor Crowson?
Thank you, Chair. Just based on best practice, how many shelter beds should we have in the city of Lethbridge for both our community population but also the unhoused population? And how many types of shelters are there? I know there's sober shelters, there's youth shelters, et cetera. How many are there? And in a perfect world, how many different types should Lethbridge have?
Very good questions, and I'm going to look to my team to see if we can answer that today.
Gary showed up.
So it's less about best practice per se that we have at our fingertips, but we do identify that we have a gap of about 170 shelter beds in our community. And in terms of the types, they really relate to a community's demographics. And so what we would see in our demographics are typically the ones that we really have in terms of Indigenous, youth, women, and seniors are typically, I think, where we would see our main population groups. And I think the biggest thing is just that there is the opportunity for options and that there are capacity in the options. Understanding that even though you may be Indigenous, that doesn't mean you need to go to the Blood Tribe Department of Health operation, and there may be many reasons why that specific location does not feel safe or appetizing to you, and then you would, if there were additional opportunities, you could go somewhere else. One of the other things that we've mentioned and is a focus about sober, that is a term that is not often used anymore. The province has asked us to maybe not use that as much, and is typically more referred to as a higher barrier shelter, just because it's really difficult operationally to understand when is someone sober and when is someone isn't. And so there's a little bit more area of gray when we talk about the level of barrier for the access.
And yet we ask restaurant operators to do exactly that. Oh, sorry. So as you would all know, on Tuesday we had a conversation about the encampment, and one of the suggestions there was that we meet at advocacy next Friday. As advocacy is part of this as well, I'm assuming that this will also be part of the conversation at advocacy. And so one of the things that we would be looking for potentially coming out of that is advocacy for the province for more operational money for shelters. So just so that we have a good understanding of this, when you're looking at the different shelters, are there costs, like if the province is looking at it, is one type of shelter a different cost to run, or do we just ask for shelter space and let them determine, or do we advocate for certain types of shelters? What's the best thing we can do to make our advocacy as effective as possible?
My understanding is that operators are typically provided on a per bed basis, and that the province has a standard amount that they would typically look at. We do know that different types of shelters have different type of complexities that may result in having additional costs or higher operating costs. But I'm not sure that we can comment on exactly how that is decided on at the provincial level.
The messaging is just more beds, more shelter space, and not necessarily to get into the nuance and let the province decide. Is that the recommendation?
I would say that there's an understanding that low barrier shelters have additional complexities that they add to the neighborhood that they are in. And so that with low barrier shelters, there would be potentially the need or the want to have more resources provided to them so that they can help the surrounding neighborhood with those extra influences that are typically drawn to the neighborhood. We typically don't see that as much with like say a high barrier shelter. They're typically located outside of the core. The ones that people that are going there are typically have less high complexity of needs. It's just really those low barrier shelters that are typically closer to your core, that have high acuity or highly complex users, and they are engaging with the surrounding neighborhood in a different way.
My last question, if I may, I don't expect an answer because I know it's part of the whole thing, but you were working on numerous different plans, and one of the things we then get are the unintended consequences, right? We've fixed this problem, everybody's moved here, this has come up. So I'm asking now that when we look at things, we play a bit of chess. If we bring in more shelter space, what do you think are the unintended consequences? What do you think as a community we should be prepping for and planning for down the road so that we don't just solve one problem and create another? Again, I don't need an answer now because you're going to be coming back with updates, but can you keep that in mind as we're moving ahead? Because that's always the thing we get, is that we're reactive. And if we keep thinking of those issues moving ahead, if we can be as proactive as possible to have some resources in place for, okay, we're doing this, well, now maybe housing is going to be an issue or whatever it's going to be, and how do we keep planning as far in advance without, with knowing that you guys only have so much staff and without being, don't work till midnight every night because I asked that question. But that would be the next thing I'd like to know. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Malcolm, for this. One of the suggestions or recommendations or ways council can have an influence, and we're talking about it, is making shelters permitted in more areas of the city, more zone types, I'm assuming. Are there communities that have had good success with this? Like, every time we've tried, NIMBY rears its head and it gets shot down. And I'm trying to figure out how best to approach this. What are the zoning types? Like, I'm sure everyone's going to say industrial is where they want these placed. But where is easiest is oftentimes not the best because folks need access to services, etc. So putting them out in the country or even on the outskirts of the city doesn't always, then they're empty. So are there communities that have had good success with these placements and permissions?
So without being the expert on the land use side as it relates to shelters, I think we've seen cities, much larger cities like Toronto, Vancouver, who have made it more available. What the end result has been is more shelter sites in smaller size. When we only have one site or potentially very few sites, the natural tendency is to make it big so you only have to go through the process once. That concentrates complex issues in one area. The more opportunities there are, the more opportunities for diverse operators and for smaller sizes, just because you can end up with more. The one thing around, I guess this is where we're at in many ways right now, is lots of individuals in our community through past engagements has said that the industrial park is the best location for a shelter because it is out of sight and out of mind for many of our pedestrian-based consumer businesses. The reality is that might be a good option for a certain type of shelter, but not all shelters. And in fact, we've seen from other municipalities like the city of Red Deer, where they actually had secured an industrial location and for a low barrier shelter, and the province decided that they would not fund it because that was not an effective location. So it's a bit of a challenging puzzle to put together. One of the things that we've seen as a success of the city of Calgary is that they didn't necessarily make permitted use in any of their standard land uses, but they rezoned more direct control bylaws or zones to specifically allow for more opportunities in very specific locations. And in those locations, through direct control, you can put in certain considerations in place for those. I guess what we saw from their experience is they did less public engagement on those individual sites and focused more on their public engagement at a macro level, where you could get community buy-in that we need shelters in our community in certain areas, and then it became less about the neighbors that are eventually going to see the most impact. Because the reality is, no matter where you put it, there will be a neighbor, and that's the challenging process with this.
Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope.
Thank you. And this question is to Mr. Malcolm and or any other member of administration that may want to chime in on this. Are we proactively working with Ms. Gearing's area on examining locations that might permit changes to zoning rather than just looking at land? So are we looking at existing facilities or structures that may be vacant at the present time that may suit our needs? And are we working with Ms. Gearing's area to look at the rezoning of them?
That is correct. Yes, we are working with the Planning and Design Department. One of the things that we would be doing as next steps is that as they evaluate the social uses, which is part of their phase 1 of their land use bylaw, which is intended to be wrapped up by the end of this year, that this is where our strategy and their work would come in together. So we don't specifically have that listed as an item in this part of the presentation, but that's certainly how we envision that conversation coming together.
And this would include both the purchase of a structure as well as the leasing of a structure for an intended purpose?
From the land use perspective, we would just focus on creating those opportunities. And then the second piece to that would be, is that a city-owned property, yes or no? And then do we want to sell it or lease it? Or is it privately held, and does that individual want to sell to province, operator, or city, or do they want to lease it to the operator?
Okay, good, thank you.
Do we have any other questions from members of this committee for the public part of this meeting? Oh, Councillor Carlson?
Quickly,
I like Jeff. He's got good questions.
Thank you. It's about the 100K that we're repurposing. Is that sufficient? Is it over, like, if it's only gonna cost 50 grand, I don't wanna give you the whole 100. So I'm just, yes, because it was 100 for a specific purpose, now it's a different purpose. Is that an appropriate amount?
So I will comment more that I think what administration and community want out of that aspect of the resolution is to just put that we're not going to do that number 1, 2, and 3, the business case and the planning around a community care campus. We could, and then the second piece of that is that, you know, with any strategy and sort of taking next steps, there's a cost towards it. So we figured if we're going to be asking for the rescindment of that part of the motion, let's try to make use of the 100,000. Let's put it in place so we have access to some level of funding to take our next step. We very well might be back asking for more money, and that would be part of those regular updates to SPC and to council, is to say what we intend on spending the funding on and whether it is sufficient. As of right now, I can't comment on that.
And that's where I do have some concerns, is just saying, here's 100K for stuff that I'm not exactly clear on. So that's it's a bit of a concern for me. I'd rather know what's necessary, and
I think our priority today would be more about the rescindment of that, and if there was a desire to make the allocation at a future date, that doesn't hold us back at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Palladino.
Yeah. The question of the 100 grant for a community care campus, when I hear campus, I think of the university or the college.
You want to rescind that? You want to get rid of that?
Yeah, I understand that. But does it have to be all at one location, this campus?
Now, I think that's part of the reason why we wanted the rescindment, is that the way that it was described in previous years leading up to that resolution was not entirely clear. And what we heard or saw and heard as we started to actually try to scope that project was that there were two different opinions on what a community care campus was. Was it one location, or was it more like a satellite and we were looking at the city as a campus and understanding which uses could go together? So that's one of the main reasons that we are suggesting let's take a step back from that. Let's talk more broadly about it. And if there's a concentration of uses down the road as we help facilitate things, then we can explore that in a little bit more detail. But in terms of how many in the community think of a community care campus and being 19 acres of land all purchased by the city at a certain location, and we just don't see that as being useful right now.
Do we have any other questions from this committee? Councillor Carlson, did you want to ask something? Just to, just to annoy Councillor Middleton Hope, please ask a question.
Through you to Deputy Mayor, what's your favorite color?
All right. So we do have a motion coming out of this, but we also have some information that we need to receive in camera. So I am going to ask for a motion to move in camera to receive information around the shelter development, and this will fall under FOIP section 21, 23, and 24. Could I get a motion to move in camera, please? Councillor Palladino.
I guess just my question is, should we not maybe do the public motion? We've got two that we've discussed quite heavily here, and then move in camera and then come out of in camera to do anything that needs to come out of in camera. But right now, I think to close the loop on what's been discussed here, does that make sense, or am I?
We could do it, but there might be information from the in-camera session that does change the public motion.
Gotcha, then I'm fine.
Okay. Motion to move in camera, please. Councillor Palladino, all in favor? Excellent. Okay, we'll take a few minutes to swap that over. Thank you. In this? All right.
Yeah, they outed the Klingons.
All right, so coming out of in camera, we have a motion here from Councillor Carlson, update shelter development strategy. This is 5.5. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee recommends to City Council, 1, that City Council directs administration to return to council through the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee with quarterly updates on the implementation of the shelter development strategy. B, work with the Government of Alberta and current/potential shelter operators to identify capital and operating funding sources for temporary and permanent shelter development on city-owned land that will adequately address the needs of those who are difficult to house. 2, that City Council, A, rescind the April 5th, 2022 resolution. Be it resolved that City Council approve the budget of up to $100,000 with the recommended funding sourcing from council contingencies to procure a consultant to do the following. 1, conduct community engagement on the creation of a Made for Lethbridge Community Care Campus. 2, create conceptual designs for a community care campus. And 3, develop a business case for a community care campus. And further be it resolved that administration provide regular updates to the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee at each step. And B, reallocate the previously allotted $100,000 from council contingencies towards the execution of the shelter development strategy at the discretion of the city manager or designate. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was hoping we could get that up because it's slightly, maybe slightly different than what we've seen. Salient points I'd like to bring out is that clause number 2 is a rescindment of a previous council motion that we're asking council to rescind that motion and not proceed with the community care campus exploration, that we repurpose those dollars to a better use. It is at the discretion of the city manager to utilize those funds, but I trust during our updates, the committee and council will get updated on how those funds are being utilized since they are coming out of council contingencies. I'm not sure if there's any other questions from my colleagues. I'm seeing none. The one question I would have is we are having an advocacy committee meeting in a week and a bit, June 23rd. Is there anything we should add in there to recommend that this be a topic for advocacy to work on at that? Because it will be probably the last one before summer. It'd be nice for some work to be done. I don't know that that needs to be in the resolution. We've got one of the agenda folks, Deputy Mayor, can take that to Advocacy Committee for us. If there's nothing further, I'll call for the vote.
Nothing further. Question's been called. All in favor? And that passes. Up next, we also have motion 7.3 from Councillor Carlson, update shelter development strategy. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee recommend that City Council direct administration to proceed with the confidential recommendations provided in confidential attachment 1B, and further be it resolved that Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee directs that the confidential documents and discussions regarding the update shelter development strategy remain confidential in accordance with sections 21, harmful to intergovernment relations, 23, local body confidences, and 24, advice from officials of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got nothing further on this. Any further comments, questions from my colleagues? Seeing none, I'll ask for the vote.
Question's been called. All in favor? And that's passed. I also have a motion here, 7.1, this coming from Councillor Palladino, with regards to the Civic Culture Plan. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee refer feedback on the Civic Culture Plan to administration to inform plan development and request administration return to the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee with a complete draft plan by the end of Q1 2024. And further be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee directs that the report, documents, discussions, and presentations regarding the Civic Culture Plan remains confidential in accordance with Section 24, advice from officials of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Councillor Palladino.
Call for the vote.
Question's been called. All in favor? That passes. We have one more item on our closed agenda, so I will ask if we could please, for a motion to move in camera for Section 24, advice from officials. I have that from Councillor Carlson. All in favor? That passes, and we will move back into our last in-camera session. Thank you very much. now on to our last motion.
And just to recommend that council call it a community theater. Really upset Roscoe Dean Yates. Is it Dean Roscoe or Roscoe Dean? Doctor.
Are we good to go? All right. Thank you very much. So motion 7.2, this is coming from myself, Yates Memorial Operating Review. Be resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee recommend that City Council confirms the mandate of the Yates Memorial Centre as a community theatre as defined in confidential attachment 2, and further be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee direct that the reports, documents, discussions, and presentations regarding the Yates Memorial Operating Review remains confidential in accordance with Section 24, Advice from Officials of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Councillor Carlson, you have
I just want the
comment or query?
records, the minutes to show that Councillor Campbell does have the vacuum out in case his wife is watching.
All right, perfect. Anybody have any questions with regards to the motion at all? All right, seeing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor? Thank you very much, everyone. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.